Welcome to the Guildmasters Guides, where we talk about everything Dungeons & Dragons. I'm your host, as always, the Wandering DM, also affectionately known as the Caffeinated Gamer, and you'll see by the speed at which I talk that is a fitting thing. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, the actual Dungeons & Dragons for new folks that are coming into the game. Actually, Dungeons & Dragons really irritated me. I actually ran the first campaign, the first one-shot I've ever ran in the history of me running campaigns, and it caused me to absolutely despise D&D, but not because it's a bad game, because it does a really bad job of introducing people to the mechanics of the game. I did a YouTube video of it, and I got a bunch of DMs, and people were like, well, you're the Dungeon Master, you can control the game. Yeah, I get that. But at the same time, when the game doesn't support bringing in new people, you got to do something different. The game itself is an absolute blast. I love Dungeons & Dragons, and I love the theory crafting behind it, and I love going through there and trying to figure out new things and new ways to play and new ways to piss off a Dungeon Master, which is fantastic. But I rolled a table for 12 brand new people to Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm going to tell you right now, that was probably one of the worst experiences of my life. Not because they didn't grasp it, but because when the character sheets were done at level 1, there was so much on them the characters didn't know what to do. There was analysis paralysis as we began the game. And I even began on rails with very specific things for them to be able to accomplish, but we spent the majority of the time looking over our character sheets and looking at spells. So we can run through these. Like, the biggest complaint that I have about Dungeons & Dragons for new players is that everything blends together. There's no real major differentiation between a lot of the characters, a lot of the classes. There's just not. When you look at what a fighter used to be, back in the day when I was young, we saw fighters and they were melee, and if you wanted to basically be a spellcasting fighter, you had to figure it out yourselves through magical items, and yeah, sure, that's how things used to be. But the reality is, in today's day and age, a fighter can use magic, a thief can use magic. There's no differentiation. Magic is kind of just everywhere. And if that's where Dungeons & Dragons is going, I guess I'm okay with it. But what I loved was that every character used to be unique. Now they're not. I had a group of 12 people, and yeah, one had a little bit higher armor class, but if the druid wanted a better armor class, they could get one. And if the wizard wants one, well, they can do it too as well. That makes everything just kind of mesh and flow together in a really, in my opinion, grotesque way. And it bothered me. I'm not saying, for goodness gracious, that it's wrong. In fact, it allows people the flexibility to play a character class however they want. But I don't know if that's a good thing or not. The differentiation between classes, between dwarves, between elves, between humans, not back in the old days, but from a mechanics standpoint, creates the separation for when you're creating a character. You have to take those things into account, right? It used to be that the races would have specific pluses and minuses to their stats. Well, that changed in Tasha's Cauldron for Everything in one of the variant rules to where now you could put those pluses and minuses wherever you want. So if you wanted a super intelligent dwarf that was sickly, you could have one. And I guess I understand what the purpose of that was. But it also takes away the reason that you'd pick a dwarf. Now, there's no reason to, because I can play whatever character class I want to play. If I wanted to make a dwarf that didn't fit the mold, I had to think about it, not just replace my stats. Now, there's no purposes in having races in Dungeons & Dragons in any way, shape, or form other than aesthetics. That's really it. In fact, everything other than humans has dark vision, so why even have anything at that point? And to get off of a rant and to talk about something that's more productive, let's take a look for a second at Dungeons & Dragons as a whole when it comes to introducing new players. At first, I made a guide, and I don't have it with me right now, otherwise I'd run through it, but it's a 79-page guide that's just about character creation. 79 pages. That's what it took to actually create a character, because every single race has a whole slew of special and extra abilities. Why is that? Why do we even have that? That doesn't make any sense at all. Why not have one thing? Well, because it's the game. I get that. But when you're introducing new players to a game, that's very complicated. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying Dungeons & Dragons does a really shit job of basically allowing anyone to see any differences between them. And what are the differences? It's no longer a stark line. go back even further from before my playing time, if you wanted to be a spellcaster, you had to be an elf. And there was restrictions to that and level caps, and you had to make that choice. But in the beginning, you were able to see the end path. Now you can't. Character creation is so heavy that it gets in the way. And so how do I simplify this as to end a rant and actually be productive conversation? And I thought about that for a long time. And what it really came down to was when I'm trying to play a game or make a game, session 0 becomes characters starting at level 0, right? Giving them very limited insight. Also, I limited what the players had access to in the beginning. This is only for new players, though. For veterans, have access to whatever you want. And the reason I came to this conclusion was because of what other dungeon masters said. Other dungeon masters really put down the fact of, hey, you're going to play with what you say I'm going to allow you to play with. And while there's merit in that, it also reduces their creativity. To go back to my point, I get that, right? That's one of those things where, yes, we want to make sure that whatever merit we're posing, whatever game we're trying to play, the characters fit with inside that game. I get that 100%. But if we are going to take that a step further and limit what players' creativity can be, that's where we lean into Tasha's Cauldron. So I bounced back and forth between these two ideas hard of, well, if we limit what the players we have, we limit their creativity. But when they're new and we give them too much, they don't know how to play their characters. And so there was no happy medium, which simply meant that Dungeons & Dragons as a game is bad for new TTRPG players. And it's bad at introducing people to Dungeons & Dragons. Because then, when you take this a step further, there's discrepancy in the rules. And so you get people that are saying, hey, we are playing this type of game. And then you get dungeon masters that disagree and play in a different way. And so there's this huge conglomeration online where I'll tell some people, hey, this is how I play the game. And you got people that come out and be like, that's shit. That's horrible. And so as opposed to uplifting and sharing positive ways we play the game, there's this negative tone that everyone's way is right. And if someone does something different than the way that I do it, you're wrong. And so we have a community that's very loud and very boisterous and filled with amazing ideas. But then we have this negative side of players that pushes new players out. And what I'm seeing is that I don't see large groups of new players entering. I see that, hey, one person will be brought in because their friend plays, right? And then they learn on that table, and then they're taught that, oh, other ways of playing is wrong. And so we create this division within the community that's not cohesive to bringing on new people. There's no good way of doing that because everyone is at everyone else's throats. And why Dungeon Masters, finding new DMs nowadays is almost impossible. And so I'm looking for productive ways to actually simplify this and bring on new players, new dungeon masters, and some of my concepts are absolutely ridiculified, or vilified. They're basically looked down upon very heavily when it comes to the community. Because, number one, let's talk about, for new dungeon masters, starting at low levels. Dungeon masters that are new should start their characters at level 1 to see how combat and how mechanics work that have low threat levels to their players. It should be hard to kill your players at level 1 with the creatures that are available, so your players can learn how to play the game, and you as a dungeon master can also learn the mechanics of the game. In that level 0 campaign, in those level 1 campaigns, we should limit what our players are capable of doing. I also am a firm believer of eliminating 90% of the subclasses at those level 1 campaigns, starting off with a fighter class, right? If it's the first time your players are playing, introduce the fighter, right? At level 1, you are a fighter. There's no class deviations, there's no sorcerer deviations, there's no cleric deviations. For the first 3 levels, you are gaining the abilities that make you that, and simplify them. Fighters are one of the more complex classes when you come off because of their maneuvers. As a veteran player, this is nothing, right? No big deal. But the thing is by simplifying the first 3 levels of the game, it allows for new dungeon masters to not be overwhelmed. They don't have to worry about what every single ability their players have. You can level up rather quickly through them, and for veteran DMs, just start at level 3. The problem is this takes an entire rehash of the gaming system for Dungeons and Dragons. There's no fix to lower level parties in the D&D game unless you have something that's outside of the game, or unless you're being restrictive. And if you're being restrictive, this works just fine, but then all of a sudden the player's like, why can't I do this? So there's a catch-22 with that. For that level 0 campaign, that level 1 campaign, you have to figure out a way to introduce challenges to your players at that level, keep them on rails, and not give them a ton of choices so everyone at the table can learn. That's a very disliked way of looking at things because, hey, I don't like it. I want my freedom. I want my sandbox mode. We're so used to having all these ultimate choices. The problem is you give a bunch of new players ultimate choices and they do things that most dungeon masters don't know what to do, or they do nothing at all. And in my campaign there were 6 people total at the table, and I was having to balance my daughter, who was all about making all the choices, and then I had another party member who never said a word. And so I would have to bring her into the game to be able to do that effectively. The second thing about it being kind of rough is all of the mechanics that a dungeon master has to know and giving players true autonomy. This is a huge deal in the community, is that the moment someone feels like their autonomy is being taken away, they lose their effing minds. And I get it, I understand it. But at the same time, as a dungeon master, when you're new, your players can't have all the autonomy that you may want to give them. And this may be controversial, but I really don't care anymore. As a dungeon master, if I'm new and I'm trying to learn the mechanics and you want to go barter and know what someone's name is, stop. Right? Especially for you veterans out there that are giving new dungeon masters a hard time by trying to railroad their campaign off the railroads. Play the game at hand. And I'm not being spastic here or evil or mean, but what I'm saying is, if you're trying to derail the dungeon master, especially if they're newer, you're being a bad player. Dungeon masters that are trying to railroad you don't want that. But when we're trying to learn the mechanics and we're new, and we have to be honest and open with each other saying this, hey, listen, I am still a new dungeon master, so if you could guys do me a favor, don't go off the rails. And if someone does go off the rails, tell them, hey, listen, I asked you earlier not to go off the rails because I'm still learning this game. I'm still learning how to run this. That's a big deal. And as a dungeon master, as a new DM, you have the right to say, hey, this is the campaign we're running. Things are going to go in a linear fashion because I'm still learning the mechanics. If you're a player and you don't want to play in that game, don't play in that game. Don't have plans to ruin it. And the reason I get hostile about this is because of the community we have. The people that are a pain in the butt are the loudest. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Yeah, I do. I mean that in a negative way. I mean that most players and most dungeon masters are doing their best, but most of the content we create is for those few a-holes that are trying to derail stuff, both dungeon masters and players alike. So as a dungeon master, if you have that one a-hole person, and it's usually a friend of yours, tell them that they're being an a-hole outside of the game in different contexts and not in character. You don't need to punish someone, but you do need to have that open and honest communication in order to really get things to where they need to be. And that's the thing, is that as a new dungeon master, as a new player, the one thing that helps is by asking questions. The problem is when we're new, we are timid. We're afraid to ask most of the time. And then you go online and you watch what everyone else is doing and you're like, oh my God, these games are this. Those are usually professional actors or people that have been playing for years. And so most of the advice that we're giving these new players comes from people with decades of experience. We have lost our perspective on what it's like to be a new player. And if you tell me you haven't lost your perspective, you're lying. You don't understand. And there's nothing you can do unless that is, I've been playing with new players. And every time I'm with a new player, I realize I take things for granted. Unless you can start a statement that way, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you have that new, fresh feeling that you've been playing for 10, 20, 30, even 5, even a year. Your newness has worn off. It has gone away. It is no longer a thing that you are dealing with. And I thought that I was keeping my newness. I thought I had what was best for new dungeon masters. I thought I knew what was great for new players until I dealt with 9 of them. It was actually 12. 6 showed up at the table. We created characters for 12. That was a big eye-opener for me, that I didn't have a clue about what new players were going through. Not a clue. or an entire book about how to create a character, and it's worthless. It's absolutely worthless. Now, did it help them? Yes, but it didn't do near what I needed to do. And that was because D&D itself is inherently flawed at the lower levels because it is a very flushed out system. It does has lots of rules to begin with. The question is where do we start with those rules? Where do we start to piece things together? And how do we give new dungeon masters and new players advice that's not clouded with our own perspective? How do we introduce new people to a game when we are the grognards, right? And I'm talking about all of us at this point. If you've been playing for more than a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and you think you can still talk to the players, you're wrong when it comes to new players and new dungeon masters until you do it. And I don't mean do it in the terms of going and create content, because I've been watching a lot of content lately, a lot of people that I really like that I thought were really smart, and I applied their knowledge and it was really bad, including my own. And that's the thing, is that our perspective clouds our judgment because we make assumptions without knowing we're making them. And this really, like, I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons right now, but this goes into all aspects of life, everywhere. It's one of those things where we do so many things and make the assumption that we're doing a good job of explaining it to someone that may not know what we're talking about. And then when they're sitting in front of us, we're like, how are you so dumb? No! They don't have the context. They don't have the know-how. They don't have the ability to understand because they have never played the game. They've never done the task, and they're overwhelmed by the overwhelming amount of choices they have. That is the thing that we're dealing with right now in the game, in life, in everything we pretty much do. And so you got to buckle down. You got to look at the thing you're doing and go, am I really doing a good job of explaining this to someone that's new? Because the chances are you're not. And this whole episode has been me ranting about what to do and what not to do. But I want to get a point across to the veteran dungeon masters and veteran players out there. We take a ton of things for granted. And even when we think we've got it, even when we think we've got this locked down and in the hole and ready to go, we still don't. And I mean that in the most courteous way I possibly can. We still don't. And we never really will. We can do our best to impart our knowledge upon a younger generation, newer people, not even younger generation, just newer people to the game, because we've got people joining Dungeons & Dragons and the TTRPG community as a whole that have never done any of these things before. And so when we make a statement of like, the best way to be a dungeon master is to have the spontaneity and the conversations between these NPCs, think about that for a second. That was what someone said to me. It's the spontaneity of the small conversations of NPCs that really brings role-playing to life. That's a great statement. And for a new dungeon master, it's an absolute load of baloney. Asking a new dungeon master to be able to improvise conversations with random NPCs on the fly is a ridiculous ask. And that's the thing, is players want that because that's what they see online. That's what's fun to watch because it does bring life to the RPG. But it takes decades of experience and trial and error to figure out where you're going to do a good job. And most likely, you're going to make a mistake. And we fail to tell new DMs that. We fail to tell new DMs that, listen, you don't have to have this perfect. And yes, you're going to have a-hole players. And so a lot of dungeon masters try it once. And they're like, no, I'm never doing that shit again. And that's where we run into issues with new players as well, as we put them down at the table and you get grognard players that are like, come on, let's go. Or you do things that I tell people to do where, hey, you have 6 seconds to make your decision. That's advice that I've given, and it's horrible advice for new dungeon masters, for new players. With new players, you may even coach them. Okay, so guys, we're entering combat, and on your character sheet, you got to remember, what are the combat abilities you have? How is it going to be to hit? You have to walk new players through this for more than one session. To expect someone to understand Dungeons and Dragons or any TTRPG in one session is absolute ludicrous. And I guess that's really where this whole rant is that maybe it's not the system. Maybe it's that us as dungeon masters and us as veteran players have an expectation of how the game should roll with more choices than the game mechanics really allow. And we never really help other people figure out the basics of the game. Because there is no tutorial. There is no press WASD to walk around, press F to interact with an object. Yes, you can interact with any object. Your skills don't or do have limitations. So not only do we have the rules of the game, we have the rules of the table, we have the expectations of the players at that table, the expectations of the dungeon master of that table, and the limitations that we may see within. Because of all those different things, we have people that are engaged in a game that has mechanics, and new players simply don't know them. What they've learned is online, and most likely that table has done things different. It's one of the most beautiful things about Dungeons & Dragons is every table can run differently. It can have different expectations. It can be a different style of game. That's a beautiful thing. But at the same time, when you're creating a brand new game for brand new people that all have different expectations, setting those expectations is not just about setting the expectations of how we talk, when we talk, who we talk, but about the mechanics of the game, how the game works, how initiative works. All of those things take time. And I failed to recognize that when running a brand new campaign for 6 brand new people. Because normally what happens is I introduce a new person. What do I have? I've got that new person, but they're coming in with another group of people. And so that makes a huge world of difference, is that they are with someone else that is teaching them along the way. I have other players to rely on. And for 30 years, that's been the norm. I have a core group of people, or I have veterans that will then offer to help the new player and read their character sheets, and then I can move the game forward and help with little bits and pieces of advice, and they learn how my table works, and therefore they become amazing at my table. But usually one of my players that's at my table is my brother, and then I usually have a core group of other players that have played before, and then I'll introduce 1 or 2 new people, not 6. And what I realized is that even when I was trying to create a character for myself, it wasn't fun. I didn't see the character creation process part. It was like, how do I get to the level that I want to get at? There was no development of power over time. There was no feeling more powerful. There was no feeling my abilities grow. That didn't exist anymore. And when I realized that, and I realized that how convoluted all the races and classes and everything become, it kind of frustrated me. There was no differences. The paladin can heal, the bard can heal, the cleric can heal, the sorcerer can cast, anyone can cast spells. Right? We have barbarians that can cast basic magic or be magical. And that can be okay. But at the same time, why can't we have someone where my class makes me unique? Right now, it's gone to the point of the role-playing makes the character unique. Because a fighter can have just as many spells as a wizard can. They can have a spell book. We have subclasses for everything. And so, I'm kind of re-exploring Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder and all these different places. Now I'm going to keep making D&D content, but I'm going to focus on some things that can enhance our games. We've got a lot of places that are out there and a lot of content creators out there that make Dungeons & Dragons an amazing, amazing, amazing game, and they have great advice. So what I'm going to focus on is creating creatures and things that help with low-level D&D, help with new people coming into the system, that limit, not expand, but give people more direction. Fighters that are more simple but still feel elegant and delightful. Bards that are skill jockeys but don't have access to absolutely everything. Right? Jack of all trades is the most broken thing ever, especially for skill checks. Otherwise, skill checks feel pointless. There's just so many things that are broken, and I want you to tell me what systems I should look at. What systems should I be playing? Is there something out there that already does this? And not close to it. I'm looking for Dungeons & Dragons that starts off simple and gets more complicated as you level up. Let me know. Now, if you saw my shorter version of this video already, where I said D&D's the worst, this is the longer version where it gives you the context of where I'm coming from. And I appreciate you guys sticking around, and I want to know what your feelings and thoughts are. You know, like and subscribe to this. This is going to be the first podcast we have. It'll also be the longer version of that video, which will be on the YouTube channel. It should be posted on Friday. But I'm going to start doing some longer form content where we actually explore some of these things, and I'm just kind of riffing off the top as opposed to being polished content. So I hope you like it. And as always, guys, you know, this is the Wandering Dungeon DM, also known as the Caffeinated Gamer, but it is the Guildmasters Guides. That is the name that I'm sticking to. I love the Guildmasters Guides because it's not just about D&D. It is about Pathfinder. It is about TTRPGs. It is about being a better dungeon master and applying things and tools to specific situations that help you. So if you need help as a dungeon master, give me some things that you want to know about, and I'll give you my take on it. Right or wrong, you'll get the honest truth. And so, as always, guys, we will see you when, I hope you know, we will see you next time.